So we're back live, and we're back live online and live here. Thanks for Beatrice for the session before and the conversation. And it was too short. There are way more questions to talk about Starevich, and I would love to do that, but of course time is tight. Now we're back on the schedule, and the second session is about quite a unique project, let's say, which not many people probably know about, even though it's been running, one way or another for several years, maybe 2 or maybe even 3. I don't remember now when it started, but the lost film, which was found in Šiaulių Museum, Photography Museum, several years ago, and from the finding of the film to today, many things happened actually, and I think this story has a lot to tell from different perspectives, and that's why the session consists of 3 different people, let's say. But not gonna extend here more, and I will call Vilija to present from Šiaulių Museum, from Šiaulių Photography Museum, who actually contacted me many years ago and said that there is a film in a box in a museum, and that was the start. Elif yesterday talked a lot about finding and discovering many undiscovered films in the archive, but in Lithuania this doesn't really happen that often, and I will try to talk about it a little bit more after Vilija, but now Vilija, please come. And here.
Diana, hello. Let's see. Okay. Like Alexa said, today I will tell you a story how discoveries in the history of world cinema can await where nothing new seems to be expected. I work in the field of photography, representing the only museum of photography in Lithuania, which is subdivision of the state-owned Šiaulių Aušros Museum. And here is the structure of it. It is one of the largest museums in Lithuania, comprising 9 subdivisions, museums with exhibitions dedicated to the history of Lithuanian photography, radio and television, bicycles, and the history of culture of Šiauliai and other regions of the north and the west and central part of Lithuania. So, in 1983, this museum purchased a set of cinema equipment from a private collector. Here it is. The museum's records described the object as a cinema projector consisting of a housing for a garbage lamp luminaire with a duck and 2 lenses and 3 cartridges, as well as 2 boxes for storing grills and other accessories. The projector was not dated, only it was indicated that it belonged to Juozas Pažemeckas, who worked in the Spaudos Fondas bookstore in the 4th decade of the 20th century. It is also indicated that the projector, before acquiring better hardware, was used in the Liaudies namai cinema in Šiauliai and in villages as movable film equipment for the display of the silent movies. It was only in 2007 or 2008 that it became clear that there were more important objects in this set with the cinema projector. when one of the Aušros Museum's subdivisions, Chaim Frenkel Villa in Šiauliai, began to prepare a museum exhibition, Provincial City, and I, as a specialist in the field close to cinema photography, was entrusted with creating one of the exhibition parts dedicated to cinema culture in Šiauliai in the fourth decades of the 20th century. And this is the view of the exhibition. It was decided to install an exhibition hall interpreting Capitol, the most modern cinema in Šiauliai at the time. Here we see some images of that exhibition. This how a film projector, which had been in the museum storage until then, came to my attention, and which we intended to exhibit. It was pleasing to see that the set included not only the projector itself, but also a few accessories used by the projectionist, as well as a few small items that helped to create an authentic working environment for the projectionist. The next slide shows the projector and accessories. But the most eye-catching were the 35mm nitride tapes rolled into 3 reels, which were not mentioned at all in the museum's inventory. Why was it decided not to document these tapes in 1983? There could be several explanations for this. First, the content of the tapes might have seemed unworthy of the museum of the history of the region. It is non-documentary, not made in Lithuania, and this has nothing to do with the history of Lithuania, of the culture of Lithuania. Secondly, the condition of the tapes and their flammable and hazardous material could have raised doubts as to their preservation, and in such cases the objects were often included in an auxiliary set from which they could be easily removed. As is likely in the present case, not mentioned at all in the accounting records. Of course, there may have been other unknown and less predictable motives that we don't know of today. So what I managed to find out about the exhibits. First, about the cinema projector. I just know that the stand on which the projector is placed is not the original part of this projector set. It is borrowed for the exhibition from the photographer's pavilion prop set, stored in the funds of the Museum of Photography. So, the sellers or manufacturers' plate on the housing of the projectors indicate that it is a product of Grass and Worf, special cinema trade house in Berlin. We couldn't find a complete catalog of the cinematographic products from this company that would help us to date our projector. From the available literature, we established that the company's first patented projector for cinematography came out in 1907, but its image does not correspond to the model we have. And the earliest data on our model counterparts, it is from 1921. in the German newspaper Das Echo, and it's featuring a Pestalozzi cinema projector for use by schools, theaters, and the public. No data was found for other cinema projectors of a similar type released by Grass and Worf between 1907 and 1921, which would correspond to the model we have. So we can almost certainly date the cinema projector around 1921. And such dating would not contradict the information that this projector showed films at the Liaudies namai cinema in Šiauliai, as it is known that a cinematographer was established by the German occupation authorities in the former public hall of Liaudies namai already during the First World War, and was still operating after the end of the war. It was originally called Fantasia until it was taken over by the Culture Society in early 1925 and renamed the Liaudies namai. It means people's house. However, the dating of the projector makes it much more confusing to find out the paths of emergence of cinematographic films in Šiauliai. The research on the film tapes, which Alekso Gilaičio will discuss in more detail, has revealed that they probably contain two films or fragments of films made around 1916. So we can see also, although the dates of the introduction of the film projector and the introduction of film, it's 1916 and 1921, are separated by a short time of only 5 years, in the historical context of Lithuania at the time, this is the very complicated times, two different epochs. However, the objects came into the museum as a set, and however confusing can complement each other's story, especially as we have no further information about the films. So let's speculate how they could have got to Lithuania, where, under what circumstances they could have been used, and who can link them to the cinema projector. It's a few slides of projector. Until the First World War, or more precisely until 1915, the cinemas of Lithuania, subjugated by Tsarist Russia, were used by filmmakers to get them through the representatives and the representations of various film firms in Moscow and St. Petersburg. There were also film rental firms. The first such firm is known to have been established in Vilnius in 1911, and also several more were established later. Cinematographic films, together with the cinema equipment to show them, were also available from special photographic and cinema equipment sales houses located in Tsarist Russia. And the slide shows several examples of catalogs from the collection of the Museum of Photography. For example, the first catalog of Richard Jacobs' trading house in Moscow in 1901. Here is a section called Tools for Those Willing to Make Money, which points out of low costs but high profits. The latest devices, the cinematograph is introduced, and the devices are proposed, and the list of tapes by them follows in this catalog. There are another examples, and It also contains a list of films available for rent or purchase, also divided into topics, dramas, comedies, nature, extravaganza, and so on. This is example from 1912 catalog of the famous Pate Brothers Moscow office, which focuses on cinema machines but also provides services for selling films. As we can see from the examples, the supply was dominated by Western European cinema. But with the outbreak of war in 1914, the supply of these films to Tsarist Russia was interrupted, which created the preconditions for the intensification of Russian cinematography. And consequently, more Tsarist Russian films made their way onto Lithuanian screens. But the situation changed completely in the autumn of 1915, when the Kaiser's German army occupied the territory of Lithuania after defeating the Russian army. The flow of film production from Tsarist Russia stopped, film rental companies were closed, and many cinemas too. Just at that time, when the ties with the distribution market of Tsarist Russia were broken and the screening of Russian films was banned in Lithuania, the films we had discovered were made in Russia. It was in 1916. So the films could not have officially entered Lithuania by the usual routes before then, at least until 1919. Of course, one of the possibilities during the war period was that films could be brought back by Lithuanian citizens who had fled to Russia during the German occupation and returned there at the end of the war as a rather precious asset, with the prospect of earning money from the shows of the films later. Another possibility is the short period after Lithuania's independence, when old films from the Tsarist era were still being screened for the while a post-war life was just beginning to emerge. Up until 1919 or 1920, they were still screened without Lithuanian subtitles, and cinema production began to reach Lithuania no longer from Russian, but mainly from Riga. Even though Russian films were quickly replaced by Hollywood production, for us the short period of time, maybe 2 or 3 years before that, is important as a time when the films we had were able to find their way to Lithuanian cinemas or traveling cinemas screens. Unfortunately, we have not yet been able to study the repertoire of Lithuanian cinemas of the period of the beginning of independence in more detail and find out if there are any films we have discovered among them. Therefore, for the time being, we can only discuss the most likely scenarios for the entry of these bands into Lithuania and rely on assumptions. So to sum up, if the tapes were made in 1916, then from the year of their creation until around 1919, the films could not enter Lithuania through official channels because at that time the territory of Lithuania was occupied by Kaiser's Germany, and there were no commercial relations between cinema of Russia. And during this period, films may have entered Lithuania through personal routes. Lithuanian war refugees returning from Russia after the war or immediately after the war, when Lithuanian cinemas were still showing Tsarist Russian films for a short while. There is certainly can be other possibility of the films entering Lithuania. which due to the lack of data cannot be identified today, and which could be revealed for further research. For example, if it were possible to trace the biography of the person who transferred the film projector with the films, or if reliable or archival data could be found or similar. For now, interesting color slide. Something wrong with the slides, but let's continue. For now, let's get back to the projector. The year 1920 is the time when the projector to which the tapes were found came into production and could have been purchased. So the version of the tapes that arrived in Lithuania and the possible time of their showing confirm that they could have been shown on this projector. However, I would doubt the statement of the exhibit's metrics that these films were shown in the cinema of Liaudies namai. It is after 1925. From the very beginning, this cinema focused on the repertoire of educational, scientific, and historical content. It's a photos of this cinema, but they are red. I don't know why. So the cinema from the beginning showed the scientific and historical content, also the supply of the new global film industry began at that time, and the cinema of Tsarist Russia had lost its relevance. In addition, when the company took over the Fantasy Hall, it carried out major repairs, installed electrical wiring, and as mentioned in the press, a new cinema machine, which could hardly have been our projector. So I would think that there is a greater chance that the tapes with our projector could have been demonstrated here in the former fantasy, as mentioned immediately after the First World War, and at that time, as indicated in the projector's inventory, we are transported around the surrounding villages. By the way, it was this projector's model Pestalozzi that was adapted and designed to showcase movable cinema. As you see, the history of these films in Lithuania is very confusing and complex, just like the historical period we are discussing. The story may not be over yet, and as we delve deeper, new surprises and discoveries may be waiting for us. Now there is some information about the films in the museum. As I have already mentioned it, until 2008, they were stored in one of the vaults of the Aušra Museum, and nothing was known about them. The storage room in which the exhibits were kept were not especially equipped and did not have special microclimate system. The films, two of them, were stored in metal reel cartridges from which films were screened. The third one was in a metal box from a Soviet film. The condition of the tapes varied. One of them was very calcified. The tape stuck together, sticky and faded. The other two were in better condition, with part of the tape in a stable condition. At that time, attempts were made to clarify the feasibility to digitizing the tapes in Lithuania, but unsuccessfully. The specialists of the Lithuanian Video and Audio Archive, to which we contacted, did not see any value in the content of the tapes, stating that the authentic ancient reels on which they were spun were probably more valuable, as there were just a few such examples in Lithuania. In addition, the archivists, in their advice to the museum staff, warned of the tape's ability to catch fire, so they were moved from the general storage to a more fire-safe tiled room in the museum's basement. Later, during the reconstruction of the museum buildings, they were moved from one place to another repeatedly. This change in storage conditions probably accelerated the degradation of the tapes, which led to a renewed search for ways to preserve them. The disintegration of the tapes also affected the reels on which they were spun. The coils began to rust rapidly, so the tapes were separated from the coils, and the coils were conserved at the Šiaulių Aušros Museum Restoration Center in 2020. In the same year, we contacted two archival film enthusiasts, Aleksas Gilaitis, for advice on preserving the films, and so began the story of the preservation and research and identification and digitization of the films. Here's Aleksas in our museum, and first look at the films. So Aleksas will tell you all the story, how it continues, and I would like to conclude by taking this opportunity to thank Aleksas for this collaboration, which will make a possibility to preserve a piece of world cinema history. Thank you, Aleksas.
Thanks a lot for thanks as well. So many pictures I saw, which I remember being taken, and I really am uncomfortable seeing it, looking at myself, but this is better, even though it is in terrible condition. But I just want to continue on the story a little bit about what happened after I came, and I checked the print, the films, and what happened since then. And as you mentioned, this was in 2020, which now sounds quite long ago, and only now, yesterday, the Bologna lab sent like a portion of some scans from this scan, but that's later. So when I got the call from the museum, well, I just suggested myself to go to have a look what it is, and go through like generally to see what is the condition of the material, what can you do with it, or is it like completely worthless and you can just trash it in the bin, which happens quite often in the archives. And this exactly the piece you see is well, in most cases you wouldn't be able to do anything with this like completely. So this piece probably just went to the trash, just saying. But anyways, there was the reels itself were quite big, and some of them looked much better than this. And there were some pictures that Vilija showed already, and tinted pictures of tinted film, and also tinted pictures there were, which was quite interesting. So when I looked through, and we together with Vilija's colleague in the museum, Viktoras Guntaivas, took some pictures of the surviving material. We winded everything through, and some of it had to be cut off and just literally trashed away. And one of the two films, we could basically identify immediately by from the intertitles, because intertitles had names of the film, and the edge code of the film said which year it is, and it was pretty clear that it's from Tsarist Russia. So, and this was quite easy, even though the surviving material of that particular film, which we identified, I already received the scans, and in total sum, it's less than 5 minutes, and it's just fragments of less than 1 minute. So it's not a comprehensible story which you can show in the cinema, and it will never be. But that film is by Evgeny Bauer, which is, I think, an important name in film history, and I think thanks to that, the other film also got scanned. No matter what, the other film which survived in much larger piece, we tried to identify with Viktoras from the museum for a bit, and I came back home and I tried to do that in searches and so forth, with no success. And then I have to thank as well, but I contacted Oksana Hefranova, the researcher from US, who's doing she knows a lot about Tsarist Russian cinema, and apparently, eventually, the lead of this identification went to Peter and Anna Bagrov, who are, Peter is working in the George Eastman House, and he's also incredibly familiar and really good film historian in this particular topic. So this lasted maybe a year or more until I got some results, and about the Evgeny Bauer's film there are no doubts, but the other one, Peter sent me a long email and a guess that this is the film, or maybe that one, but more likely this. I won't talk about the exact what film it is, because Peter will do it himself. But when, after identification, we with the museum, the museum mainly tried to get funding from the Lithuanian culture, Lithuanian cultural funding for scanning of this film, and it is also, I think, worth to mention that it is a unique case, because, we're asking to scan a film which is not in its territory, because we have Lithuanian Film Center as well, and Lithuanian Film Center is dealing everything with film-related things. But restoring film is not in its territory, and preserving or conserving materials in the museums is more of the cultural fund. So it is somewhere in between, and it was not clear that it will be successful. But the museum wrote an excellent application, I guess, and it went through. Of course, we didn't get the entire funding that was necessary just for scan. But so then there was networking work to get the rest of the funds to actually get it done. And what I did was basically going to sort of festivals like, I don't know, Bologna or Pordenone, or maybe even emails and such, and just talking out loud. That was my way of doing this. And eventually, it also took some time, but thanks to Marianne Levinsky, she convinced Cineteca di Bologna that this is a project they should scan, and they should cover at least part of the project. And we came across another really interesting problem, which probably nobody in Lithuania faces, is how to transport nitrate print from Lithuania. And I don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody has a nitrate print. There is no nitrate print. In Bologna, for example, since we're working with this quite often, and they're doing quite regularly, they're doing a lot of projects. We just consulted with them and all. And apparently, I mean, it's a funny story, but apparently they have a guy, I don't remember now his name, but it was some name, he just gave me a name, a guy who's traveling around Europe and picking up nitrate prints and bringing back to Bologna. And of course he's going to France, to Germany, never of course to our part of Europe, because, well, why would he? And so I was hoping that this would happen and he'd come and pick it up, and apparently he's so booked that he couldn't come in time, at least in time that we could we could present this now. So we just had to just ship it somehow. And another funny story is that all of the dangerous goods to transport outside of Lithuania, when you call the companies, there are companies of course doing this, they would just, when you call them and ask, okay, how much would it cost and how long would it take and so forth to get to this particular address or whatever, they ask how many containers, ship containers you have of this particular thing. And of course I have the codes of the chemical, what it is and what kind of dangerous goods it is. And like when you deal with something of a box, you know, like maybe like 2 laptops, they don't care. Or maybe they could say that, okay, maybe next year or something, maybe. So this didn't work, and actually we just did it sort of illegally, and because there was no other way, or just by self there was another option, just sit in the car and drive it by yourself. But this happened, and it ended up in Bologna, and the material was pretty in bad shape, and it is still in bad shape, not that it changed a lot, but they cleaned it out. They do all of the chemical process, and in Bologna it's been like for 2 months, I think, already. And just last week I got the Evgeny Bauer's fragments of these little clips. And yesterday, as I said, some more. So it was really interesting to see, and of course their work was good. Currently, I think we're facing another question of transporting it back, because nevertheless it is a piece which belongs to the museum, and Bologna doesn't need it. Or maybe we can, I don't know, think of something else. But no matter what, we will have some sort of digital files, and thanks to Cineteca, thanks to l'Immagine Ritrovato, to the Cultural Fund, to everyone involved, and actually everybody who at least heard about this and helped out, because there was just out of goodwill, let's say. And before giving you Peter, who's gonna be like from the screen, I hope everything technically will work out. I can show you, to tell the truth, a little clip from what was scanned. Oksana, I would ask to put the digital slide now, and I will just change this for a bit. Since it actually arrived yesterday, it should be in downloads. No? Is it? It's not. These are the photos actually from the print, like just to show you a couple when we took photos when we were looking through, so you can imagine the edge codes and how it looked. Like this, and it also had this. What is it? Central Police. Yeah, but both of the prints was on Eastman stock. Okay, so where did I get it? I'm sorry to not being prepared because I wasn't. Here. So this film is from yesterday. It's not the Evgeny Bauer's fragment, and in connection with the rest of the festival, which of course has a circus theme, as you probably mentioned, and whoever went to the films yesterday and the day before watched a lot of circus-themed films, and yesterday saw He Who Gets Slapped, probably. And this particular film, I would say, is the inspiration of this year's circus theme, and I just saw it from still, so I couldn't see it, but I saw circus theme, definitely. I will just scroll through some of the images, but no matter what, this is how it looks. Just to say, yeah, maybe the light. One of the lights. Can you turn it off? Is it better? Awesome. So I'm not going to go through all of it because not everything is scanned, and well, it's a work in progress process, but I just wanted to show you some sort of imagery which was on the film, and this is a great circus performance on there. Okay, I just wanted to show this one little piece, and I think it's good example how how it looks, and now we'll try to switch to Peter Bagrov, and I bet Peter will have so.
Can you show us
the reel? Well, it was restored in Bologna. I don't have a picture or anything, but the reel looked much better than this, of course. And this, I'm not really sure.
It's not from this reel.
This is from this. Yes, it is. Yeah, what I just showed. This is from this. I remember these pictures quite vividly. This is actually just before packing it to ship it to Bologna. So I was putting it in boxes and then put it in another box and then triple box.
Are these 600 or 300 meter cans?
These are 600. Yeah, this is like a typical cans we used in the distribution back in Soviet times. Yeah, I think I'll. That's it from me, and if there are more questions from both, probably from Vilia and me and Bagrov, I hope to be able to answer. And now we're going to try to switch him to the screen.
Actually, you should switch on the light again. I think Peter is going to be on solution.
Yes, we'll try.
You do, right? You see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, so sorry for the technical difficulties. So, well, the question is are the films worth all of us? And there are multiple reasons why they are. First of all, let's talk a little about the survival status of the, well, let's say pre-Soviet cinemas. I wouldn't say pre-revolutionary because it also includes films made in 1918, 19, and 20, before the Soviet era. So based on the existing filmographies, first by the name Vishnevsky, compiled in the 40s, a more complete one done recently and still unpublished by Alexander Dryabin, there have been from 2,400 to 2,600 films made in the Russian Empire. So, based on the official catalog published by Gosfilmfond and edited by Vladimir Simarchuk, there are only 332 films surviving. That's less than 13%. If we take some major names like Evgeny Bauer, who was mentioned here before, and let me minimize my screen here, yeah. So he directed 83 films, of which 28 survive, which is actually rather high for early Russian cinema, at 34%, but still, that's not even half, and some of his most famous films are lost. Some of his canonical films are canonical just because they exist, and because film scholars write about them, not because they were big titles at the time of their making, with the exception of one or two. But then the other question is, of the surviving films, how authentic are the existing copies? So only 45 films exist with original intertitles. That's less than 2% of the original of the complete list. So everything else was reconstructed accurately or inaccurately. So only 12 in Russia, now we discovered some more, survive as original prints. That's less than 0.5%. And if the print's not original, if they're later prints, that means that they are usually black and white, there is no tinting, and so forth. Now, if we include everything that has been identified, except these two films, I deliberately did not include them, in all of the world film archives, at least those I'm aware of. You don't need to read all this list very carefully, but the complete list of pre-revolutionary films, pre-Soviet films rather, which survive with original colors, tinting, toning, stencil, color, hand coloring, fits one page. There are 37 titles. Again, out of this 2,600, so that's 1.4%. And this is why many film historians and cinephiles think that Russian films, and actually Soviet films as well, were black and white, unlike American films and German films and all the other films in the world. And actually they were not. They were tinted and toned just like everything else, but they did not survive in their original form. So, Evgeny Bauer, we are very lucky to have one reel with fragments of Life for Life, this very big film, which is a very important film, which exists as a feature-length black and white version. In this little reel, there are little segments with each of them about a minute, 2 minutes long. And then we can have an idea of the colors of Evgeny Bauer's film and actually also of the sharpness of the photography by Boris Zavilev, who was the cinematographer in most of his films. And Bauer was a visual artist, so that's extremely important. And that was all. And actually, so speaking of Bauer, Bauer was a director who started his career in the theater as a set designer. And he always had this set designer in him. If you look at his films, the absolute majority of them are not realistic psychological dramas. They are actually a combination of architecture and ballet, in a way. You could see the geometrical forms that the actors, the shapes that they would form, especially along with sets, with the columns, with the drapery, things like this. It is always a visual poem, and of course in a visual poem, a color, if there is one, is extremely important, and that is missing. So one of the two films we're talking about, Человеческие бездны, Human Abysses, 1916, all we had before that was this poster. There were a couple of production stills in the trade press. We didn't have any, I never at least came across any high quality production stills. So if we zoom into this poster, we can see some of the images. And this is the quality of these images, which again do not really do justice to Bauer. And as a side note, for those who are not too familiar with his work, he was very often criticized at the time, especially later in the Soviet days, for having too lavish sets with too many columns, with too many pieces of furniture. Not only did these pieces of furniture form this interesting geometry when you can have multiple layers of activity, something very clearly happening in the background or in the forefront, but also he was hiding light behind some of these pieces of equipment for furniture, so he could build a very complicated, sophisticated lighting scheme. So if we take this image, now we can see it in a much higher quality. And this is actually, a video of a raw scan when it will be graded and cleaned to be much more, I would say, true to the original colors and the sharpness of the image. So what we have from this film are just little fragments. But this is very, very typical Bauer, and Bauer at his best. It was considered a major production. It was somewhat criticized for his treatment of the story, and we're lucky that the screenplay survived, so we know what the film is about. It may even be possible to, do some kind of, not a real reconstruction, but some kind of a comprehensive, lecture with little clips inside. But he was praised for, again, for the lighting, for the sets, for the visual poetry, so to say. It's the story about a woman who is married to a crippled man. He is a chemist and an owner of a factory. There was an explosion, and he lost one of his legs and one of his arms. And she has an innocent platonic affair with a friend of the family. She doesn't want to be unfaithful. But this affair is being noticed by a blackmailer. And when they're being blackmailed, the man who's in love with her kills the blackmailer. And at the same time, the crippled husband, who discovers that the wife doesn't really love him, but she is faithful and she's honest, he commits suicide in order to set them free. And surprisingly, the main characters, except for the crippled husband, do not die at the end, which was not very typical for Russian melodramas, especially for Bauer. It was even sometimes started his film death. So here was one of the images. But look at the others. This one, for example. This is extremely typical of Bauer because we see how action is taking place in several directions at the same time, in several layers, if you will. But this being said, because the print is so decomposed, this is actually a faded shot. There is another shot from the exactly same scene, and we see that in reality it should be in color. And again, it adds something to the to the atmosphere of the image. This one is very badly decomposed, but again, the same thing. It is a scene in court at the end of the film where the main character, who is actually has to defend an innocent man and save him from the crime that he himself committed without admitting that. So we see the main character is completely decomposed, doing something at the very left, and then we see the crowd waiting for the results of the trial on the right. And again, Bauer was wonderful at spreading action like this, which very few Russian, and actually not only Russian directors of the time, were able to achieve. This much more clearly visible image, again another favorite technique of Bauer's, when you use a mirror, and thus again the action takes place in multiple directions. It may even be confusing in a way, but that was the beauty of cinema for him. Here is another shot which is even more typical. If you look at it, and we actually have this in motion, it's even difficult to understand what is happening, except it's beautiful. Well, there's a huge mirror, and while the guests, this is the beginning of this scene actually. So while the guests are moving up the stairs, we're looking at the mirror where they're going the other direction as well. So again, it is always this geometry and ballet. No wonder he very often had ballerinas as leading actresses, like Alexander Shelepin in this film, or Vera Karali in others. Again, in this case, we see this, I would say, dark, or rather, white triangle formed by the snow. It is a rather important psychological scene. It is right before this murder of the blacklister, but this, not just the diagonal framing of the alley, but then the line of the houses. This is again Bauer and Boris Zavalev at their best and most typical. And then, of course, the colors, because every scene was tinted differently, which added to the atmosphere, not always realistically. It was not the typical tinting when you have blue for the night scenes and and red for the fire scenes. So if you look at the colors here, this is a beautiful scene, which we have just a little fragment. This is so red, not because of the fire, because there's very little fire at the fireplace, but because it is a beginning of a mystical scene when the main character who committed this almost accidental murder has a conversation with himself, with his double, which was clearly influenced by the Karamazov brothers. In this very, very decomposed shot, we can see the main character played by Vital Polonsky talking to himself. It was a double exposure, something that Bauer loved special effects as well. So unfortunately, all we have from this double scene is this very, very damaged shot, to my knowledge. But again, this was described, by the way, in the reviews as one of the inventions and know-hows of the film. So you see, we have the colors of Bauer's films, and again, do not forget that this I'm just using the low quality frame grabs from videos. Once it is graded and once it's in high resolution, we have a much better idea of the style. And what is of course beautiful is the way the colors transform. Again, these are phone pictures, not ideal, but this being said, the one I love the most on the right, of course it never looked like this on the film. He was not that avant-garde to have one little frame of a different color. The film, which I assume was not in a great condition way before it was discovered at the museum, because it was very weirdly spliced together, scenes that don't really work together. So there were bits and pieces that somebody tried to make sense of and put together, but here we have all the scope of colors applied by Bauer, and we don't have it in any other films, because even the fragment from Life for Life that we have has only 2 colors. So again, this is, I think, for that quite an important discovery. So we are happy to have a screenplay which was published back in 1916 in the magazine Pegasus, and it actually has been reproduced online. There is this database with librettos and screenplays of early Russian films, which was compiled by Anna Kovalova and her students, and my my knowledge now, they're working on an updated version also with images, which probably would have a different address, but this was done at the Higher School of Economics. So thanks to this website, first of all, we checked if there was a libretto, as they were called, a synopsis, and there was not. But there was a screenplay, and it is available. Unfortunately, the texts themselves are in Russian, but the description of the search engine sort of is in English. So it is an important tool for early Russian films. So knowing the story and having these little fragments, I think it is, when I looked at them, I looked at the scans, it is pretty easy to understand from which scene each shot is. So there could be an interesting sort of video essay, a monument of this lost film, if you will. So the second film, Daniel Roch, I am now definite this is exactly this film. Why? Well, it was problematic because there were two. So we identified the actor from the first frames that Oksana Chefanov actually published on the Domitor, or sent to the Domitor community, and then Anna Kovalova and I identified first the actor and then the films. It was a trilogy. The first film was called The Devil's Descendant, потом от дьявола, and the second part was Daniel Roch. And because it had to do with a circus story and the same character played by Vladimir Maximov, a very big star, huge star of Russian cinema, and a pretty important theatrical actor as well. So until we watched the fragments, it was difficult to identify which of the two films it is. It is the second one. In this case, we're not talking about this, as the French call it, cinéma de qualité, like Evgeny Bauer. Evgeny Bauer was a name. He was a star almost as much as the actors in his films. Mikhail Boch-Tomaszewski was not a star, and the production was actually ridiculed by the press. That there is no real story. It's a very stupid imitation of an American action film that Americans do better. And again, 1916, or starting in 1915, because of the war, German films, and for a different reason, because it was difficult to export film stock, French films, almost stopped their way to the Russian screens, and that was the beginning of this American expansion of the Russian screens in the whole Russian Empire. So there was a tendency to show more action films and try to imitate them. We do not know the story because there is no synopsis and there is no screenplay. At least we haven't found it yet. There are several reviews which help us sort of identify the story. In the first film, The Devil's Descendant, a count played by Maximov steals the mistress of a circus performer by the name of Daniel Roch. And Daniel Roch decides to revenge and to turn their lives into hell, which he does. And as a final step, he kidnaps the Count's daughter, and sends him a message, a little letter or a telegram, not clear, saying that I will only return your daughter to you when she is the symbol of vice and sin. So she's going to turn her into the most sinful woman in the world. That is the end of the first film. In the second film, the Count's son, played by Maximov, so here is the Count's son, tries to find his sister, goes to the circus, becomes a circus star, fights this evil Daniel Roch, kills him, but the sister also dies. So that's more or less all we know. So the story was considered stupid. Maximov's acting was not praised. Is there anything interesting about this? Well, first of all, we don't have too many Russian action films and mystery films in a way. And it's interesting as a contrast to Bauer and Protozanov. But not only that. So here is Maximov dressed as Pierrot. But next to him here is Nikolai Nikitin, who was a very important circus performer and an entrepreneur, and one of the most famous in Russia. He owned a circus, and his whole troupe is in the film. And because circus was extremely popular at the time, among all sorts of the pre-revolutionary Russian society, including the high society, we have very little actual circus in film, even though they're circus-themed film, with big circus stars never very rarely put in films, but we have quite a bunch of them here. Because we only received a part of the scans, not all of them, yesterday, I was not able to identify everyone. We know that Nikitin was in the film. It was very easy to find him. I don't know yet which part he plays. I think he actually plays maybe the director or the owner of the circus. He was at a certain point the director of the Moscow circus, the most famous one in the country. So he was a star as big as Maximov himself. The woman here almost probably is Tamara Gamsakhurdia, another important circus actress and a dancer of Georgian origin, who mainly worked in Moscow but returned to Georgia every now and then. It could also be her sister, because there were two Gamsakhurdia sisters, they're both in the film. It will take some time to identify, but I think it's quite feasible. And then the other actors, or the performers, are yet to be identified, but they are actual circus performers, and I think for the history of circus, it is extremely important. And not only Russian circus, because circus was a very international art, and there were always French, Spanish, Italian, German circus performers working in Russia. Like this gentleman, who is probably one of the most famous circus performers in the whole history of Russian circus. Of Italian origin, his name is a fake American first name, William Struzzi. So the Struzzi family toured Europe and finally settled in Russia. And Williams, who went to Europe again in the early 20s, then returned to the Soviet Union, and he was the director of the circus in Leningrad, St. Petersburg and Leningrad. Apparently, he must be the one who is playing the title character, Daniel Rock. It is not mentioned in any filmographies, but since he's the one who gets killed at the end, I guess that's the thing. So the discovery of Struzzi in film is actually a very big thing, especially in the main part, because it was thought that he was playing just a bit part. Now, apparently, he is the, not protagonist, antagonist in this case. So here is some of this sort of American action that we see in cinema, but of course, a very typical Russian tragic ending when we see the dead villain in the background, that innocent heroine who did not become the symbol of vice and sin and desperate brother, saved her when it was too late. So let me stop sharing my screen. Yes, well, as you see, in terms of tinting and framing, this is no Bauer film, but its interest lays in a completely different area, and besides, as Alexis said, we have much more of it left. So perhaps in this case, some kind of a comprehensive story could be recreated. And again, considering how little we have from that era of the cinema of Russian Empire, every film is an important discovery. Well, in this case, we happen to come across films that have merits of their own. Thank you very much.
So thanks a lot, and I just wanted to ask if anyone has a question, because there is still availability, even though the technical conditions are not perfect. But to me, Vilija or Peter, and thanks Peter a lot for quite a summary of what we found, basically. So please welcome any questions, because I don't have one. Yes, just a second.
Excuse me, is it possible for me to talk to Peter Bagrov? Huh?
Like now, personally, or what?
Just to be introduced to him? Or is it possible later? Or
Yes, I think he'll be around. So.
It's possible?
Yeah, he will be online.
You don't mind?
I don't mind, but during this Q&A,
Okay.
after the Q&A.
After.
Okay. Anyone question about this project particularly? Elif?
I don't want to sound critical, but the thing is, you mentioned that the nitrate will come back to Vilnius or Lithuania. But I think there is a bit of a problem in here in the sense that if there is really no other nitrate, and if there is really no other nitrate storage in your country, then you will not create one for 3 cans of film. So this opens like a new discussion, I think, like who will take care of it. And I could totally understand that you have every right to ask it back because you found it. But I'm concerned about the preservation of the nitrate print as it is already decayed considerably.
I told about the conditions we had earlier, but now we at the Museum of Photography have the storages equipped for the storing photography. So we have a microclimate control system and so on. So I think we could preserve the nitrate films in our storages in the better way.
Yeah, anyone else maybe? Anyone else a question about the project? No? Then I think we will just finish this this session because anyways we're quite late with time. And thanks a lot for coming, and thanks a lot for all of the presentations. And well, we'll just see how this project will continue on well, in the near future, I think. And I think all 3 of us who did the presentation are really like keen in seeing this film, well, at least these fragments being screened somewhere. And since the international community and Peter Bagrov included also is aware and updated live, basically, I think it has, well, relatively good chance for this. So anyways, thanks a lot. And well, I think we'll finish the translation. And thanks for coming to the whole conference.